On Monday, the 6th of October, 2025, at 9:12 in the morning, a thick envelope landed on my desk like a stone thrown straight at my past. My assistant, Lila Grant, dropped the stack of partnership proposals with a look that suggested business as usual, but the name at the top of the firm from Denver froze my blood. After years of silence, the man who claimed I would never be a real lawyer was finally knocking on my door. My name is Heidi Black, and until that precise moment at 9:12 in the morning on Monday, October 6th, 2025, I believed that the past was a closed jurisdiction. I sat in the corner office of Halcyon and Varga, a space defined by floor-to-ceiling glass and the quiet, aggressive hum of a firm that billed $800 an hour for junior associate time. The view outside looked over Arlington, Virginia, not Manhattan, a deliberate choice I had made to distance myself from the performative chaos of New York while remaining close enough to the federal regulatory heartbeat to matter. Lila Grant, my executive assistant, who moved with the silent efficiency of a cat stalking prey, had just placed the morning stack of correspondence on the mahogany surface of my desk. It was a Monday ritual. Most of it was standard fare, which included partnership opportunities, charity gala invites, and threatening letters from competitors that amounted to little more than professional posturing. But the thick, cream-colored envelope on top was different. It carried a weight to it, both physical and metaphorical. The return address was embossed in a navy blue serif font that screamed traditional values and old money. Mercer, Whitaker and Lowe, Denver, Colorado. I did not reach for it immediately. My eyes locked onto the name printed clearly on the cover letter. Right above the managing partner title, Gordon Mercer, for exactly 20 seconds. The world inside my office stopped turning. The ambient noise of the firm outside my glass walls faded into a dull, unrecognizable buzz. My heart did not race, my palms did not sweat. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me, the kind of hyper-focus one experiences right before a car crash or a closing argument. Gordon Mercer, the man who had once looked at me across a dinner table and told me that my ambition was nothing more than a cute hobby. The man who had dismissed my entire existence with a laugh and a wave of his hand. He was not writing to scold me. He was not writing to critique my career. He was writing to ask for a partnership. I reached out and flipped the cover open. The proposal was titled Strategic Partnership Opportunity. It was a polite corporate euphemism. In the legal world, when a firm like Mercer, Whitaker and Lowe reached out to a firm like mine with a proposal titled Strategic Partnership, it usually meant they were bleeding out in the water and looking for a shark that would not eat them immediately. Lila was still standing there, holding her tablet, waiting for instructions on the rest of the pile. She cleared her throat softly. I looked up at her, my face a perfect mask of indifference. "Lila," I said, my voice steady, betraying absolutely nothing of the storm brewing behind my ribs. "I want you to schedule a meeting for this proposal." She tapped her screen. "When would you like that?" "Ms. Black, tomorrow," I said. 2:30 in the afternoon. She nodded. "Who should I invite?" "Just the acquisition committee?" "No," I replied, keeping my eyes on Gordon Mercer's signature at the bottom of the page. "Invite everyone. I want every senior partner in the room." Lila paused, her eyebrows knitting together for a fraction of a second. It was an unusual request. Preliminary partnership talks were usually handled quietly, in the shadows, until the numbers made sense. Bringing in the full weight of the senior partnership meant I intended to make a statement. "Is there a specific agenda?" she asked. "Just tell them we have a potential acquisition target that requires immediate, high-level scrutiny," I said. "And Lila? Make sure the conference room is the one with the glass walls facing the lobby." I waited until she left the room and the heavy oak door clicked shut before I allowed myself to breathe. I pulled the file closer, sliding my finger down the summary page. I did not need to read every word to understand what I was looking at. I spoke the language of failing firms fluently. The numbers were catastrophic disguised as a temporary downturn. Their gross revenue had slipped 14% year over year. Their realization rate, The percentage of billable work actually collected in cash had plummeted to 82%. In a healthy firm, anything below 90 was a warning light, 82 was a siren. I flipped to the client retention section. 2 of their major energy sector clients had departed in the last 6 months. Taking roughly $4 million in annual billings with them, I ran the math in my head. With that kind of revenue loss and the overhead of a firm that size, they were burning cash. I turned to the liabilities page. There it was, buried in the footnotes of their financial disclosure. They were dangerously close to violating their bank covenants. If their debt-to-income ratio slipped another 3 basis points, the bank could call their loans. They would be insolvent within 30 days. Mercer, Whitaker & Lowe was not looking for a partner. They were looking for a ventilator. But then I saw it. The detail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Under the section labeled Synergies and Integration, there was a paragraph outlining their requests. They were asking for full access to our international client roster for cross-selling opportunities, and more audaciously, they requested immediate integration into our proprietary technology platform. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that vanished into the air conditioning. They wanted our tech. They wanted the proprietary AI-driven case management system that I had spent 5 years and $10 million developing. It was the engine that made Halcyon and Varga faster, leaner, and more lethal than any firm twice our size. Gordon Mercer wanted to plug his dying firm into my life support system. He had no idea who he was asking. He probably thought Halcyon and Varga was just another East Coast firm run by faceless bureaucrats. He had not done his due diligence. If he had, he would have known that the managing partner was the same girl he had once ignored at his own son's graduation party. I picked up my phone and dialed the internal extension for the analysis team. "Get down here," I said the moment the head of the department picked up. 5 minutes later, 3 junior partners and 2 senior analysts were standing around my desk. I did not ask them to sit. I tossed the Mercer file onto the center of the desk. "I want a full risk scan on this firm," I ordered, and I do not mean a standard review. "I want you to tear them apart." One of the analysts, a sharp kid named David, picked up the file. "What are we looking for specifically? Ms. Black?" "Everything they are not telling us," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Look for potential litigation that hasn't hit the docket yet. Look for hidden debt structures or off-balance sheet liabilities. Check their HR records for any settled harassment suits or wrongful termination claims. Review their office leases in Denver. I want to know if they are locked into expensive real estate they cannot afford." I paused, letting the silence hang for a moment to ensure they understood the gravity of the request. "And check their professional liability insurance," I added, my voice dropping an octave. "Check if their premiums have spiked in the last 24 months. If they are bleeding clients, they might be making mistakes. If they are making mistakes, their malpractice carrier knows about it before anyone else." The team nodded. Sensing the blood in the water, they scrambled out of the office, eager to dissect the carcass I had just thrown them. I stood up and walked to the window. Arlington stretched out below me, a mix of government efficiency and modern ambition. It was a stark contrast to the wood-paneled, stuffy offices of Lakewood, Ohio, where I had grown up. Gordon Mercer belonged to that old world. A world where deals were made on golf courses and reputation was something you inherited, not something you built. He believed that the name on the door was enough to protect him. He was wrong. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back was 34 years old, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my father's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun. She was Heidi Black. She was not the Heidi who cried in her bedroom because her father's best friend thought she wasn't smart enough. Gordon Mercer was coming here tomorrow. He was coming to ask for mercy, though he would call it strategy. He expected to walk into a room, shake hands with a few old men, and secure a deal that would save his legacy. He expected to charm his way out of bankruptcy. He did not know that he had just knocked on the door of the one person on earth who had been preparing for this meeting for 2 decades. I walked back to my desk. My calendar on the screen blinked with the notification for tomorrow, 2:30 in the afternoon. I could have met him earlier, I could have cleared my morning schedule, but I wanted him to wait. I wanted him to sit in my lobby, surrounded by the sleek, intimidating minimalism of my firm. I wanted him to watch my associates walk by, sharp and hungry. I wanted him to check his watch at 2:15, and then again at 2:25, wondering why he had not been ushered in yet. Waiting reduces a man's confidence. It makes him question his standing. It shifts the power dynamic before a single word is spoken. He was coming to me. He was the one with the hat in his hand. I opened my leather-bound notebook. It was a habit I had kept since law school. I never trusted digital notes for the things that truly mattered. There was power in the friction of ink against paper. I picked up my fountain pen and wrote a single line on the blank page, underlining it twice with a precise, unwavering hand. It was my strategy for the meeting. It was my strategy for the entire negotiation. It was the first rule of the game I was about to play with the man who thought he taught me everything about power. Let him speak first. The ink on the page was still wet, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office, but my mind was no longer in Arlington. The name Gordon Mercer had acted as a ripcord, yanking me out of my high-rise sanctuary and dragging me back to a humid backyard in Lakewood, Ohio. It was a place where the grass was always perfectly manicured, the fences were painted a suffocating white, and my worth was constantly measured against a yardstick I was never meant to reach. I was 9 years old the first time I understood that I was invisible. It was the 4th of July. The air smelled of charcoal fluid and expensive cologne. My father and Gordon were standing by the grill, nursing tumblers of scotch that ambered in the late afternoon sun. Gordon was holding court, as he always did, his voice booming across the patio. I was sitting at the patio table, meticulously arranging the plastic forks and knives into perfectly straight lines, trying to be helpful, trying to be good. Trent, Gordon's son, was running wild near the pool. He was a year older than me, loud, clumsy, and possessed of a destructive energy that the adults seemed to find charming. He had just snatched a toy truck from a smaller neighborhood boy. Pushing him into the grass to claim it, the smaller boy started to cry. I waited for Gordon to scold him. I waited for the lesson on fairness. Instead, Gordon laughed. He pointed his cigar at Trent and grinned at my father. "Look at him," he said, his voice thick with pride. "He does not ask for permission. He takes possession. That boy has the killer instinct. He is going to be a litigator before he is 20. I remember looking down at the forks I had straightened. I had done everything right. I had been quiet. I had been polite. I had created order out of chaos. But Gordon looked over at me, saw my neat little rows of cutlery, and shook his head with a dismissive smirk. "And Heidi," he said, dragging out my name like it was a chore. "Heidi is going to be a wonderful secretary someday. She knows how to organize things for the people who actually do the work." That was the seed. It was planted deep in the soil of my childhood, and Gordon watered it with casual cruelty for the next decade. As I grew older, I thought I could prove him wrong with data. I thought the world was a meritocracy where inputs equaled outputs. If I worked harder, if I scored higher, he would have to acknowledge that I was just as capable as Trent. I became obsessed with perfection. In middle school, I brought home a report card that was nothing but straight A's. I laid it on the coffee table when Gordon came over for Sunday dinner, positioning it so it could not be missed when he finally picked it up. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He glanced at it for 3 seconds, then he tossed it back onto the table like it was a piece of junk mail. "Grades do not make a lawyer." "Heidi," he said, not even looking me in the eye. He was watching a football game on the television. "Any grind can memorize a textbook. The law is not about what you know, it is about who you can break. You are too eager to please the teacher. A real lawyer wants to destroy the teacher's argument." It felt like a physical blow. It was a hammer striking the glass foundation of my self-esteem. He had moved the goalposts. He would always move the goalposts. By high school, the dynamic had calcified into a painful ritual. I was the overachiever fighting for scraps of validation. Trent was the golden prince who could do no wrong. Trent was failing algebra, but Gordon bragged about his charisma. Trent got suspended for a locker room fight, but Gordon called it high spirits. I joined the debate team. It was the closest thing to a courtroom I could find. I spent nights awake until 3 a.m, researching geopolitical sanctions and economic policies, memorizing rebuttals until my throat was raw. In my junior year, I made it to the state finals. It was held in Columbus, a 2-hour drive away. I invited Gordon. I wanted him to see me in the suit I had bought with my own babysitting money. I wanted him to see me dismantle an opponent with logic and precision. He said he would try to make it. I won. I stood on that stage, holding a trophy that was half the size of my torso, scanning the audience for his face. I saw my mother, clapping politely. I saw my debate coach. I saw strangers. But the seat I had saved for Gordon Mercer was empty. On the ride home, I checked my phone. There was a notification on Facebook. Gordon had posted a picture of Trent standing in the driveway, wearing a tuxedo for prom. The caption read, "Look at that stance. The kid owns the room without saying a word. That is courtroom presence." I realized then that it did not matter if I won the argument. In Gordon's court, I was disqualified before I even opened my mouth simply because I was not Trent. I went to university. I got into a top-tier school. The kind with ivy on the walls and endowments larger than the GDP of small countries. I thought, surely, this would be the undeniable proof. Gordon's reaction was a shrug. "It is a good school," he conceded, swirling his drink. "But academia makes you soft. It teaches you to think in theories. Real lawyers need to know how to dominate a room physically. You are too small. Heidi, you have a quiet voice. You will get crushed in voir dire." He never stopped. It was a relentless, low-level war of attrition against my confidence. Then came law school. I earned my seat at a prestigious institution, clawing my way into the top 5% of the class. I was devouring case law while Trent was barely scraping by at a third-tier school that his father had donated money to. During my second year, I came home for Thanksgiving. Gordon and his wife were there. The dinner conversation turned to our future careers. "Heidi will probably go into estate planning," Gordon announced to the table, cutting into his turkey, "or maybe family law, something gentle. She is too soft for corporate litigation. She would cry the first time a judge yelled at her. She will be great at the paperwork, though someone has to file the motions that the real lawyers write." The table laughed. My mother laughed nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. I sat there, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles turned white, feeling the heat rise up my neck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. But I knew that if I showed emotion, he would just point and say, "See? Too emotional." The breaking point came the summer before my final year. I had secured a summer associate position at one of the most aggressive firms in Chicago. I had not told anyone yet. I wanted to save the news for the right moment. Gordon was hosting a cocktail hour at his house. He had invited 2 of his senior partners, men who were legends in the local bar association. He called me into the living room, ostensibly to get them fresh ice, but really to use me as a prop for his favorite comedy routine. "This is Heidi," he said, gesturing to me as if I were a piece of furniture. "She is studying law, believe it or not, but we are trying to convince her to look into legal publishing. She does not have the stomach for the arena. She is a sweet girl, but she is not a real lawyer." One of the partners looked at me with pity. "That is a tough field, young lady," he said. "Maybe Gordon is right. It takes a certain kind of thick skin." Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock finally turning. I set the bucket of ice down on the coffee table. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood echoed in the sudden silence. I stood up straight. Smoothing the front of my dress, I looked directly at Gordon, then at his partners. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and cold, devoid of the trembling deference I had carried for 20 years. "I just accepted an offer for the summer associate program at Kirkman and Ellis in Chicago. In their mergers and acquisitions group." The room went dead silent. Kirkman and Ellis was not just a firm, it was a predator. It was leagues above anything Gordon Mercer had ever achieved. It was the major leagues. And he was playing t-ball. I continued. Locking eyes with Gordon, they offered me the position because I had the highest brief score in the interview process. They did not seem to think I was too soft. In fact, the hiring partner told me I was the most lethal candidate they had seen in 5 years. Gordon's face turned a mottled shade of red. The partner who had pitied me choked on his drink. I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the room. As I reached the foyer, I heard Gordon's voice, low and furious, hissing at my mother. She embarrassed me. She did that on purpose to make me look stupid in front of my partners. She is ungrateful. He did not care about my success. He only cared that my success made him look like a liar. I walked out the front door, and I never went back. 2 weeks later, I stood in line at the courthouse, holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than lead. It was a petition for a name change. I did not want to be Heidi Mercer anymore. That name belonged to a frightened little girl who organized plastic forks and waited for a pat on the head that was never coming. I wanted a name that owed nothing to him. I chose my mother's maiden name, Black. It was simple. It was stark. It sounded like a judge's gavel hitting the sounding block. When the clerk stamped the document, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. It was not an act of hiding. I was not running away from Gordon Mercer. I was erasing his trademark from my life. I was reclaiming the product. I made a vow to myself that day, walking out into the harsh sunlight of downtown Cleveland. I swore that I would build a career so formidable, so undeniable, that if Gordon Mercer ever crossed my path again, he would not see the little girl he mocked. He would have to look up to see me. He would not deal with Heidi, the niece, the daughter of a friend, the soft girl who should stick to paperwork. He would deal with Heidi Black, and now, 20 years later, the prophecy I whispered to myself on that courthouse steps had come true. He was not coming to see Heidi. He was coming to see the managing partner. He was coming to beg for salvation from the very person he claimed could never save herself. I closed the notebook on my desk in Arlington. The memory faded, leaving behind only the cold, hard resolve of the present. The anger was gone. Anger is hot and messy. What I felt now was ice. He wanted a real lawyer? Tomorrow, at 2:30 in the afternoon, I would show him exactly what a real lawyer looked like, and I would do it without raising my voice, without asking for permission, and without a single ounce of the softness he so despised. I picked up the file again. Let him speak first. I whispered to the empty room, and then I would speak the last word. I did not walk into the legal profession. I hit it like a sprinter crashing into a wall of water. For the first 5 years of my career, I did not own a plant. I did not own a pet. I barely owned a mattress. My apartment in Chicago was nothing more than a glorified storage unit for my suits and a place to shower between shifts. I lived in the office. I lived in the glow of dual monitors, scrolling through thousands of pages of discovery documents until my eyes felt like they were bleeding. I survived on lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline spike of a deadline. Gordon Mercer had told me I was too soft for the pressure, so I decided to become the pressure. I volunteered for the cases no one else wanted. I took the document reviews that involved millions of pages of technical jargon. I took the litigation prep for hostile takeovers where the opposing counsel was known for screaming matches and intimidation tactics. I learned to sleep in 4-hour bursts. I learned to eat standing up. I learned that silence in a negotiation was not a sign of weakness, but a weapon. If you stayed quiet long enough, people would fill the silence with their own insecurities. I developed a reputation. In the hallways of the Chicago firm, and later in the wider legal circles of the East Coast, they did not call me nice. They did not call me sweet. They called me a machine. They said Heidi Black was cold. They said she was fast. But mostly, they said she never missed. I became obsessed with the minutiae. The devil was not just in the details. The devil was in the comma that changed a liability clause into an indemnity. The devil was in the definitions section on page 42. I once saved a client $50 million because I noticed that the opposing counsel had defined the fiscal year incorrectly in a single subsection of a merger agreement. My senior partner had missed it. The opposing partner had missed it. I caught it at 3 in the morning, running on sugar and spite. That catch made the industry papers. The American lawyer ran a piece on the settlement, mentioning the young associate who had dismantled a veteran team's strategy with a single red pen. It was the kind of victory that usually prompts phone calls from old mentors and proud family members. My phone remained silent. I knew Gordon read The American Lawyer. I knew he kept a stack of them in the waiting room of his Denver office to impress clients. He had to have seen my name. He had to have seen the analysis of the case, but he never called. I heard through a mutual acquaintance, a paralegal who had moved from Ohio to Chicago, that Gordon had dismissed the article over lunch. She got lucky. He had reportedly said, "Finding a typo is proofreading. It is not lawyering." His silence was better than his praise. His praise would have meant I was playing his game. His silence meant I was winning my own. My ascent was not a climb. It was a vertical launch. I was headhunted by Halcyon and Varga LLP, a venerable firm in Arlington that was rich in history but poor in modern strategy. They were losing market share to the agile, tech-forward firms in D.C. and New York. They needed a shark, but they wanted one that looked polite. They hired me as a junior partner. 3 years later, I orchestrated a coup. It was not a violent revolution. I did not shout. I simply made myself indispensable. I brought in clients that the old guard could not understand: tech startups, renewable energy consortiums, international fintech groups. I rebuilt the firm's billing structure. I integrated AI into our discovery process, cutting costs by 30% while increasing our profit margins. When the old managing partner announced his retirement, the board looked around the table. They saw men in their 60s who were afraid of the future, and they saw me. I became the youngest managing partner in the history of Halcyon and Varga. I was 31 years old. The first thing I did was tear down the culture that Gordon Mercer would have loved. I abolished the unofficial requirement that partners had to play golf to get the best cases. I ended the practice of hiring associates based on who their fathers knew. I built a new team. I looked for the hungry ones. I looked for the quiet ones. I specifically looked for the young women who sat in the back of the room during interviews, the ones who had clearly been told they were too quiet, or too intense, or not charming enough. I remember hiring an associate named Sarah just last year. She was brilliant, a terrifyingly smart writer, but she stuttered when she was nervous. One of my senior partners wanted to cut her. He said she would never survive a deposition. I looked at him and said, "She does not need to charm them. She needs to outthink them. Put her in the research unit. Let her write the arguments that kill the other side before we even walk into the room." Sarah is now one of our top billers. Every time I promoted someone like her, every time I validated a talent that did not fit the traditional mold, I felt like I was retroactively defending the 9-year-old girl who just wanted to organize the silverware. I was building the firm that I wished I had started in. My personal life, however, was a casualty of the war. I spoke to my mother, Sharon Black, perhaps once a month. The calls were brief, superficial exercises in avoidance. We talked about the weather in Virginia. We talked about her garden in Ohio. We never talked about Gordon. We never talked about the day I changed my name. She was a woman who had spent her life smoothing over rough edges, trying to keep the peace at the expense of her own dignity. She loved me, I think, but she loved her comfort zone more. She could not handle the conflict that my existence represented. To acknowledge my success was to acknowledge that her husband, the great visionary, was wrong. And Sharon Black did not have the strength to tell Gordon Mercer he was wrong. So we stayed in the shallow end of the pool, discussing hydrangeas while I managed a firm with $200 million in annual revenue. And then there was Trent. I did not follow him on social media, but in the legal world, you cannot escape news of your competitors. Trent Mercer was now a partner at Mercer, Whitaker and Lowe. He was the heir apparent. I saw his face on the regional 40 under 40 lists that I knew you could buy your way onto with enough sponsorship money. The articles always described him as charismatic and a natural litigator. They talked about his courtroom presence. They never talked about his brief writing, They never analyzed his case strategy. It was always about his style, his smile, his ability to connect with a jury. But I knew the truth about lawyers like Trent. They were sprinters, not marathon runners. They ran on charisma, which is a finite resource. When the case gets complex, when the judge is hostile, when the opposing counsel is not charmed by a bright smile, they crumble. You cannot charm your way through a forensic accounting audit. You cannot wink your way out of a breach of contract allegation. I watched from a distance as his firm's press releases became more frequent and more desperate. They were announcing wins in small, insignificant cases as if they were Supreme Court victories. They were sponsoring every gala in Denver, trying to project an image of vitality. It is the classic behavior of a hollow empire. The louder they shout, the less they have to say. Which brought me back to the file on my desk. I looked down at the financial statements of Mercer, Whitaker, and Lowe again. I had read them 3 times since yesterday, and the conclusion was inescapable. This was not a strategic partnership proposal. This was a distress signal flare fired from a sinking ship. Gordon was not expanding, he was drowning. The realization hit me with a complicated mix of satisfaction and melancholy. For years, I had imagined this moment. I had imagined him failing. I had imagined him realizing that his golden son could not save him, that his charm could not pay the rent, but seeing it in black and white, the declining revenue, the desperate grasp for our technology, the impending bank covenant violations, it did not feel like a victory lap. It felt like watching a car crash in slow motion. He was coming to me because he had nowhere else to go. He had burned bridges with the other big firms in the region because of his arrogance. He could not merge with a direct competitor in Denver because it would destroy his ego to admit defeat to a rival he played golf with. So he looked east. He looked for a firm he thought was distant enough to not know his secrets, but successful enough to write a check. He looked for Halcyon and Varga. He thought he was walking into a negotiation with strangers. He thought he could use his old tricks, the firm handshake, the war stories, the appeal to tradition, to dazzle the leadership team in Virginia. He did not know that the managing partner of Halcyon and Varga knew exactly how he took his scotch. He did not know that the woman sitting at the head of the table knew that his bluster was a shield for his insecurity. I closed the folder. The sun was setting over Arlington, casting long, sharp shadows across my office. My reflection in the glass was dark and indistinct. This was not just business. Business is transactional. You give me value, I give you money. This was something else. This was a reckoning. Gordon Mercer was bringing his dying legacy to my doorstep. He was asking me to save the very institution that had been used to bludgeon my self-worth for 20 years. He was asking me to save the inheritance of the son he chose over me. I picked up my pen and tapped it against the leather cover of the notebook. He would walk into that conference room tomorrow expecting a lifeline. I was going to give him a mirror. I stood up and put on my coat. The office was quiet now. The associates had gone home, or were hiding in their offices for the late shift. I walked past the empty reception desk, past the wall where the portraits of the founding partners hung. They were stern, serious men who built this firm on hard work and intellect. I wondered what they would think of what I was about to do. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. I needed to sleep. I needed to be rested. Tomorrow was going to be the longest day of my life. I stepped out into the cool night air. A taxi was waiting. I got in and gave the driver my address. As we pulled away, I looked back at the building. The lights on the top floor were still on. My floor. Gordon Mercer was flying across the country right now. He was probably drinking a gin and tonic in first class, rehearsing his pitch, telling himself that he was still the king, that this was just a strategic maneuver. He had no idea that the strategy had already been decided. This was not a partnership. It was a salvage operation, and I was the only one who knew where the wreck was located. I took a deep breath and watched the city lights blur past the window. Come on, Gordon, I thought, come and tell me I am not a real lawyer. Come and tell me I cannot handle the pressure. I am ready. The digital clock on my wall displayed 10:45 in the morning, but inside the war room on the 22nd floor, Time had dissolved into a haze of data points and red flags. My analysis team had been working for nearly 24 hours straight. The air in the conference room was thick with the smell of stale espresso and the hum of overheating laptops. David, the lead analyst I had tasked with the deep dive, stood at the head of the table. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms tense with caffeine and stress. He did not look like a man who had found good news. He looked like a coroner who had just opened a body and found something contagious. "We have a problem, Ms. Black," David said, skipping the pleasantries, or rather, Mercer. "Whitaker and Lowe has a problem, and they are trying very hard to hide it under a rug that is far too small." I leaned forward in my chair, interlacing my fingers. "Tell me," I said. David tapped a key on his laptop, and a chart projected onto the smart glass wall. It was a timeline of their operating expenses, specifically their insurance outlays. "Look at this spike in their professional liability premiums," David pointed out, tracing the line with a laser pointer. "It jumps 35% in the first quarter of 2024. That is not a market adjustment. That is a penalty." I studied the numbers. A hike that aggressive meant one thing. The insurer viewed them as a high-risk client. "Why?" I asked. David brought up a new document. It was a redacted settlement agreement from a sealed case in the Denver District Court. We found a trace of a malpractice suit filed against the firm 18 months ago. It was settled out of court with blinding speed. The settlement amount is sealed. But look at their cash reserves for that same month. I looked at the balance sheet. A generic line item labeled Miscellaneous Operational Costs had ballooned by $2.5 million in a single week. "They paid out $2.5 million to make something go away," I murmured, doing the math. "And they did not claim it against their insurance because they were afraid of being dropped completely. They paid it out of pocket. That is why their cash flow is bleeding." "But what was the error?" I asked. "You do not pay $2 million for a missed filing deadline." David hesitated. "We cannot see the case details, but we cross-referenced the dates with their associate turnover. 2 senior associates working under Gordon Mercer were fired the day after the settlement check cleared. The rumor on the legal forums is that they blew a statute of limitations on a medical malpractice class action." I sat back, feeling a cold smile touch the corner of my mouth. So, Gordon Mercer, the man who preached about the sanctity of the profession, was running a shop so sloppy they were buying their way out of negligence claims. "Keep digging," I said. "That explains the cash flow. But it does not explain the desperation. A firm like that can survive a single hit. There is something else." "There is," David said, his voice dropping. "And this is the part that kills the deal if we are not careful." He pulled up a contract summary. It was for their largest client, a massive mining conglomerate called Bitterroot Resources. I knew the name. They accounted for nearly 18% of Mercer's annual revenue. "We reviewed the master service agreement with Bitterroot," David explained. "There is a change of control provision in Section 14. Paragraph B. I knew exactly what he was going to say before he said it. If the ownership structure of the firm changes by more than 50%, I recited, the client has the unilateral right to terminate the contract immediately without penalty. Exactly, David said, if we acquire them. Or even if we structure a partnership that looks too much like a takeover. Bitterroot walks. And if Bitterroot walks, we are buying a shell. We are buying a firm with overhead but no engine. Does Gordon know we know this? I asked. I doubt it, David replied. They did not upload this specific contract to the primary data room. We found it in a subfolder labeled Historic Archives. They tried to bury it. They are hoping we do not read the fine print until the ink is dry. I said, typical, but the real bombshell was yet to come. David signaled to one of the junior analysts, a young woman named Priya, who had been scouring the email metadata. Ms. Black, Priya said, her voice steady but quiet. You need to see this communication log. We found a thread that was deleted from the main server, but was cached in a backup file they forgot to scrub. She projected an email chain onto the wall. The subject line was Capital Injection Proposal. third party. I scanned the sender and recipient fields. The emails were not from Gordon, they were from Trent Mercer. And the recipient was a firm called Vulture Capital, a colloquial name for a litigation finance group based in New York. These were the loan sharks of the legal world. They advanced money to desperate firms in exchange for a percentage of future settlement winnings, usually at predatory interest rates that could strip a firm of its assets within 3 years. I read the body of the email. Trent was not just asking for a loan, he was offering them a seat at the table. He was offering the finance group veto power over which cases the firm took on. In exchange for an immediate infusion of $5 million, he is selling the firm's autonomy. I whispered, he is selling their ethical independence for quick cash. But look at the timestamp. Priya noted, this was sent 3 days ago, and look at Gordon's reply. I looked at the bottom of the chain. Gordon had replied with a single line, "We cannot do this, son. It is too risky." And Trent's response, sent 2 hours later, "We do not have a choice. Dad, unless you want to tell the partners we cannot make payroll next month, I am handling this." I leaned back, steepling my fingers. The narrative was shifting. I had assumed Gordon was the architect of his own demise, and in a way, he was. But the immediate danger wasn't Gordon's old-fashioned arrogance. It was his son's reckless incompetence. Trent was trying to mortgage the house while it was on fire. This changes the leverage. I said to the room, Gordon is not just fighting bankruptcy, he is fighting a coup from his own blood. He is terrified that if he does not find a savior, his son is going to sell the firm to the butchers. I stood up and walked to the window. The view of Arlington was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the murky waters I was wading through. "What about the talent?" I asked, turning back to the team. "If the ship is sinking, the rats are usually the first to swim. Who is leaving?" David clicked to the final slide. It was a list of personnel, color-coded by activity level on the firm's document management system. "We have detected high-volume download activity from 4 key associates," David said. "They are downloading their deal lists, their contact sheets, and their writing samples. That is the universal sign of someone preparing a lateral partner questionnaire. They are looking for jobs." I scanned the names. They were the workhorses, the ones who actually billed the hours while Trent was out shaking hands, if they left. The firm's capacity to do complex work would vanish. One name caught my eye. Maris Cole. She was a senior associate. I looked at her metrics. She had billed 2,400 hours last year. That was an insane number. It was the kind of number you only hit if you had no life and a desperate need to prove yourself. Her realization rate was 98%. Clients paid for her work because it was flawless. "Why is she still an associate?" I asked. With those numbers, she should have made partner 2 years ago. David pulled up her HR file. It was thin, but the performance reviews told a story I knew by heart. Outstanding technical skills. Read one review signed by Gordon Mercer, but lacks the social fluidity required for partnership. Does not participate in firm networking events. A bit too abrasive with support staff. Not a cultural fit. I stared at the words. Not a cultural fit. Abrasive. Lacks social fluidity. I knew exactly what those words meant. They meant she was a woman who did not laugh at their jokes. They meant she was a lawyer who focused on the law rather than the golf score. They meant she was me, 20 years ago, trapped in a room with men who thought her seriousness was a character flaw. Gordon was doing it again. He was suppressing the best talent he had because she did not look like the son he adored. He was letting a star burn out in the basement while he let a firework explode in the living room. "This is the key," I said, tapping the glass where Maris Cole's face was displayed. It was a serious face, unsmiling, with eyes that looked tired but sharp. "Gordon thinks his asset is the client list." I continued. "He thinks his asset is the brand name. He is wrong. His asset is the people he is ignoring. If Maris Cole leaves, that firm collapses in 6 months, loan or no loan." I turned to Lila, who had been standing quietly by the door, taking notes on her tablet. "Lila," I said, "cancel the reservation for the main boardroom." Lila looked up, surprised. "But Ms. Black, that room has the best view." It is where we take the VIPs. I know. I said, I do not want them comfortable. I do not want them looking at the view and feeling like they have arrived. I want them to feel exposed. Book the small glass conference room near the elevators. I ordered, the one we use for internal audits. Lila hesitated. That room is intimate, and everyone walking by can see right in. Exactly. I said, I want my entire firm to see them. I want my associates to walk by and see Gordon Mercer sitting there, sweating. And I want him to see them. I want him to see the diverse, young, hungry talent that I have built. I want him to see exactly what he threw away. And Lila, I added, make sure there is only water on the table. No coffee, no pastries. This is not a social call. This is a deposition. Lila nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. She understood. Understood. Ms. Black, glass room, water only. I turned back to the analysis team. You have done excellent work. Package this data into a single executive summary. I want the insurance spike, the Vulture Capital emails, and the Bitterroot contract clause on one page. I looked at the clock again. It was almost noon. Gordon was probably landing at Reagan National Airport right now. He was probably straightening his tie, checking his reflection, telling himself that he was the great Gordon Mercer coming to bestow a favor on a lesser firm. He was walking into a trap, but it was not a trap laid with malice. It was a trap laid with truth. I looked at Maris Cole's picture one last time. Hang on. Maris, I thought, you have been invisible for 5 years. Tomorrow, everyone is going to know your name. I picked up the printed report. It felt light in my hand, but I knew it carried enough weight to crush a 30-year legacy. I walked to my desk and placed the report squarely in the center of the blotter. I was ready. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin. At exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, the elevator doors slid open on the 22nd floor, depositing 3 men into the sleek, polished concrete expanse of my lobby. I watched them from the monitor in my office. They looked like artifacts from a museum exhibit on corporate power in the late 90s. Gordon Mercer walked in front. Flanking him were Dale Whitaker and Nolan Lowe. They wore navy suits that were cut too boxy, the fabric heavy and expensive, signaling a refusal to adapt to the slimmer, sharper tailoring of the modern era. They carried leather briefcases that looked worn, not with character, but with fatigue. They looked around the lobby with a mixture of confusion and disdain. They were used to wood paneling, oriental rugs, and receptionists who offered coffee in china cups. Instead, they were standing in a space defined by white light, minimalist furniture, and the quiet, intense energy of a tech campus. Lila greeted them. I could see her gesturing toward the small glass conference room. I saw Gordon frown. He said something to her, likely questioning why they were being led to a fishbowl instead of the corner boardroom. Lila, unflappable as always, simply smiled and pointed the way. I waited. My notebook sat closed on my desk. The single sentence I had written, "Let him speak first," was burned into my mind. I checked my watch, 2:32. I could have gone in then, but power is often measured in minutes. Every minute they sat in that exposed glass box, watched by the passing associates. Their confidence would erode just a fraction more. They would feel the eyes of the young lawyers, the very demographic they struggled to retain, judging them. I waited until 2:37, 7 minutes, long enough to be noticed, precise enough to be calculated. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out. When I entered the conference room, the conversation died instantly. All 3 men stood up, but it was a reflexive, sluggish movement. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I said. My voice was low, modulated to absorb the acoustics of the glass room rather than fight them. I extended my hand to Gordon first. "Heidi Black," I said, managing partner. Gordon took my hand. His grip was firm but brief, the kind of handshake a man gives to someone he considers a functionary rather than a peer. His eyes scanned my face, but there was not a flicker of recognition. He saw a woman in a suit. He saw a title, but he did not see the 9-year-old girl he had dismissed at a barbecue. He did not see the law student he had mocked in his living room. To him, I was a stranger. Ms. Black, Gordon said, putting on his best statesman smile. A pleasure. This is Dale Whitaker and Nolan Lowe. I shook hands with the others. Dale looked nervous. His eyes darted to the glass walls. Clearly uncomfortable with the lack of privacy, Nolan looked tired. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a suit that no longer fit him well. Please, sit, I said, taking the chair at the head of the table. There was no coffee, there were no pastries, just 4 crystal glasses and a pitcher of water. Gordon settled into his chair. Unbuttoning his jacket, he cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks. He was ready to perform. I could see him shifting into the persona he had cultivated for 40 years, the wise, benevolent patriarch of the legal community. We appreciate you seeing us on such short notice. Gordon began. His voice was rich, practiced. We have heard great things about Halcyon and Varga. You have built quite a machine here. Thank you, I said, keeping my face blank. Gordon leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. We are here because we believe there is a unique opportunity for synergy. Mercer, Whitaker and Lowe has been the bedrock of the Denver legal market for 35 years. We have relationships that go back generations. Families, corporations, land developers, they trust the name. In our part of the world, trust is not just a metric, it is the currency. He paused, waiting for me to nod, to agree, to be charmed by the romance of the American West. I remained motionless. We are looking for a strategic partner, he continued, undeterred. Someone who can bring the technological edge while we provide the established client base. We view this as a merger of equals, your innovation, our tradition. He spoke for 10 minutes. It was a beautiful speech. It was full of words like integrity, legacy, and handshake deals. It was the speech of a man who believed that his past glory was enough to pay for his present failures. When he finally stopped, the silence in the room was heavy. I picked up the pitcher and poured myself a glass of water. The sound of the water hitting the glass was the only noise in the room. I took a sip, set the glass down, and looked directly at Gordon. That sounds like a wonderful history. Mr. Mercer, I said. Gordon smiled, thinking he had won. However, I continued, my voice hardening. I am not an historian. I am an investor in future outcomes, and looking at your financials. The future seems to be in dispute. Gordon's smile faltered. Excuse me? I opened the folder in front of me. I did not need to look at the numbers. I had memorized them. Your gross revenue has declined for 3 consecutive fiscal years. I said, 14% last year alone. You have lost 2 primary clients in the energy sector. Your realization rate is hovering at 82%. Gordon stiffened. The market in the Mountain West has been soft. He said quickly, the energy sector is cyclical. We are in a trough. Everyone is down. That is factually incorrect. I countered. I tapped a page in the folder. I have the financials for 3 of your direct competitors in Denver. They are up an average of 12% over the same period. The market is not soft. Mr. Mercer, the market is moving. It is just moving away from you. Dale Whitaker made a small noise in his throat, like he was choking on a cough. Nolan Lowe stared at the table. Gordon's face tightened. We are restructuring, he said. That is why we are here, to modernize. Let us talk about that restructuring, I said. You mentioned legacy. A legacy requires an heir. Who is your succession plan? If we partner with you, who runs the Denver office in 5 years? Gordon straightened his tie. My son, Trent, he said, and his voice carried a defensive edge. Trent is a partner. He has been with the firm for 8 years. He has the killer instinct. He connects with the clients. Trent, I repeated. The name tasted bitter, but I kept my expression neutral. I have reviewed Trent's performance metrics. I said, his billable hours are in the bottom quartile of your partnership. His client origination numbers are inflated by accounts that you pass down to him. Gordon's eyes narrowed. Trent is a rainmaker. You cannot measure his value on a spreadsheet. He has the intangibles. I leaned forward. In my firm, Mr. Mercer, we do not bill for intangibles. We bill for results. And frankly, a person is not a plan. If Trent is your entire strategy for the future, that is not succession, that is nepotism. The room went cold. This was a word you did not use in polite company. Certainly not to a man like Gordon. He bristled. You are speaking about my family. I am speaking about a liability. I said calmly, I decided to push harder. I wanted to see if they had anything left. Let me ask you a question. I said, looking from Gordon to Dale to Nolan, if I say no today, if I walk out of this room and decline this proposal, what is your plan B? I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. The silence stretched out, agonizing and revealing. Dale looked at Gordon. Nolan looked at Gordon. Gordon looked at me, his mouth slightly open, but no sound came out. They had no plan B. They were at the edge of the cliff, and I was the only rope they could see. I closed the folder with a soft thud. That is what I thought. I said, Gordon recovered, but his face was flushed. We have options. He lied. We have had interest from several firms. I ignored him. Here is my assessment. I said, you are asking for a strategic partnership. You want full integration. You want access to our international platform, our AI technology, and our balance sheet. In exchange, you offer a brand that is losing value, a client list that is shrinking, and a management structure that is based on bloodline rather than competence. I paused to let the words sink in. That is not a partnership, Mr. Mercer. That is a donation, and Halcyon and Varga is not a charity. Gordon stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Now see here, he snapped, his voice raising. I came here in good faith. I expected a professional negotiation, not an interrogation. You young corporate types think you can reduce 50 years of legal standing to a few columns on a spreadsheet. You lack respect for the tradition of this profession. We built this industry. He was shaking. It was the anger of a king who had been told his crown was made of paper. I remained seated. I looked up at him, calm and immovable. I respect results, Mr. Mercer. I said, tradition is a lovely thing to hang on the wall, but tradition does not pay the rent. Tradition does not pay the malpractice insurance premiums that you have been struggling to cover for the last 6 months. Gordon froze. His eyes widened. He had not known that I knew about the insurance. How? He started, then stopped. You are asking me to buy a house that is already on fire. I said, and you are offended that I'm pointing out the smoke. I stood up. I was wearing 3-inch heels, which made me nearly eye level with him. The answer is no. I said. Gordon stared at me. He looked like he had been slapped. He was waiting for the counteroffer. He was waiting for the but. In his world, no was just the start of the haggling. I reject the proposal for a strategic partnership. I clarified. It is too high risk for my partners, and it offers too little value for my firm. But, Dale Whitaker stammered, but we have a flight back tonight. We cannot go back with nothing. That is not my concern. I said. I pressed the button on the intercom. Lila, please show the gentleman out. Gordon looked at me with a mixture of fury and confusion. He was trying to reconcile the situation. He was Gordon Mercer. People did not dismiss him. Girls did not dismiss him. You are making a mistake, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. You are underestimating what we bring to the table. And you, Mr. Mercer, I replied, looking him dead in the eye, are overestimating what you have left on it. Lila opened the glass door. Gentlemen, she said, her voice bright and polite. Gordon hesitated. He looked at me one last time, searching for a crack in the armor, searching for the deference he felt he was owed. He found nothing but smooth, impenetrable glass. He grabbed his briefcase, his knuckles white. Come on, he barked to his partners. We are wasting our time here. He marched out, head held high, trying to salvage his dignity. Dale and Nolan followed him like beaten dogs, casting apologetic glances over their shoulders. I watched them go. I watched them walk through the lobby, past the associates who were pretending not to look but were absorbing every second of the drama. I watched the elevator doors close on their backs. I sat back down in the empty conference room. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. I had done it. I had looked the monster in the face and told him he had no teeth. But I was not done. I reached for my phone. The rejection was necessary. It was the shock to the system they needed. Now, they would go back to Denver. They would panic. They would realize the walls were closing in. And that was when the real negotiation would begin. I tapped a message to my analysis team. Phase 1 complete. Keep monitoring their bank covenants. Call me if they move a single cent. I looked at the water glass Gordon had used. He had not taken a single sip. I picked up my pen and opened my notebook again, below. Let him speak first. I wrote a new line. Now, let him sweat. The distance from the glass conference room to the elevators was perhaps 40 feet. But as I walked behind the 3 men, escorting them out like a warden releasing prisoners who had been denied parole, the silence made the hallway feel endless. Gordon Mercer was walking fast. His stride was stiff, agitated. The walk of a man who was used to ending meetings on his own terms and was now trying to physically outpace the humiliation he had just endured. He did not look back. He kept his eyes fixed on the brushed steel doors of the elevator bank, clutching his briefcase as if it contained the last remnants of his dignity. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his suit jacket pulled tight across his back. He was furious, but beneath the fury, there was confusion. He could not understand why a stranger in Virginia had treated him with such precise, surgical coldness. Dale Whitaker and Nolan Lowe trailed a step behind him. Looking like children who had just been scolded by a teacher, they were uncomfortable. They knew the meeting had been a disaster, but they lacked the ego that was currently blinding their senior partner, so they were more observant of their surroundings. We reached the elevator bank. Lila, ever efficient, had already pressed the call button. The down arrow was glowing a soft, unforgiving red. We stood there in a cluster of awkward proximity. The air conditioning hummed. The faint sound of ringing phones drifted from the associate bullpens. Gordon stared at the numbers above the elevator, willing them to change. He refused to look at me. It was Dale Whitaker who broke the silence. He was the thoughtful one of the trio, the one who actually read the case law while Gordon drank scotch with the clients. He shifted his weight, cleared his throat, and turned slightly toward me. "Ms. Black," Dale said, his voice tentative. I looked at him. "Yes, Mr. Whitaker? I just wanted to say," he continued, glancing nervously at Gordon's back, "regardless of the outcome today, I have followed your work. I read your analysis on the St. Jude Hospital merger case in the Law Review last year. The way you restructured the liability shield was, well, it was impressive. I have not seen a maneuver like that in 20 years. It was a genuine compliment. It was a lawyer respecting another lawyer. Thank you." I said, "It was a complex case." Gordon stiffened. The mention of my work, the validation of my skill from his own partner, seemed to pierce through his wall of anger. He turned around slowly. He did not turn to scold Dale. He turned because something in the tone of my voice, or perhaps the specific cadence of my response, had triggered a memory he had buried deep under years of scotch and self-importance. He looked at me. For the first time since he walked into my office, he actually looked at me. He did not see the managing partner. He did not see the obstacle. He looked at the structure of my face. He looked at the line of my jaw. He looked at the way I held my chin high. A defensive habit I had developed to make myself look taller when I was 12 years old. The lobby was bright, flooded with natural light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. There were no shadows to hide in. Gordon's eyes narrowed. He squinted slightly, as if trying to bring a blurry photograph into focus. "Black," he muttered. It was barely a whisper. He looked at Dale, then back at me. The gears were turning. I could see the precise moment the tumblers in his mind began to click into place. He was processing the name, Black. It was a common name, but paired with the face? Paired with the voice? "Sharon," he said. The name slipped out of his mouth like a reflex. It was not a question. It was a sudden, involuntary association. Sharon Black, he said again, louder this time. The name hung in the air between us. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, radiating a calm I did not entirely feel. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of professional indifference. Yes, I said. My voice was level. Sharon Black is my mother. The color drained from Gordon's face so fast, it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His skin turned a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at me, really looked at me, and the arrogance that had defined his posture for the last hour evaporated. Heidi? He breathed. He said it like he was testing a code. He said it with a mixture of disbelief and horror. He was trying to reconcile the image of the shy, quiet girl he had tormented with the powerful woman standing in front of him. He was trying to connect the child he had dismissed as a secretary with the managing partner who had just dissected his business. I looked him straight in the eyes. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, letting the weight of the revelation crush the air out of his lungs. Correct, I said. I took a small step forward, invading his personal space just enough to make him flinch. The girl who is not a real lawyer is sitting in that chair. Mr. Mercer. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Nolan Lowe looked between us, confused. He was slower on the uptake, but he saw the look on Gordon's face and realized something catastrophic had just happened. Dale Whitaker looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. He stared at his shoes, realizing he had just witnessed a car crash of biblical proportions. Gordon looked like he might be sick. He gripped the handle of his briefcase so hard his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted around the lobby, suddenly aware that he was standing in my territory, surrounded by my people, completely exposed. Heidi, he stammered. I had no idea. He looked at the elevator, then back at me. He seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. The bluster was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was an old man realizing he had walked into a trap of his own making. We need to speak, he said, his voice trembling. Privately. Please. He gestured vaguely toward the conference room we had just left. He wanted to get away from the staring eyes of my receptionist. He wanted to get away from his partners. He wanted to pull me back into the dynamic of the past, where he was the adult and I was the child, where he could talk his way out of anything. I shook my head. A single, sharp motion. No, I said, but Heidi, this is a misunderstanding, he pleaded. If I had known it was you, if you had known it was me. What? I interrupted. You would have prepared a better pitch? You would have hidden your financials better? No, I mean, family. He choked out the word. I cut him off. You brought business into this building. Mr. Mercer, I brought business into this building. There is no family here. There is only a buyer and a seller, and right now, I am not buying. Gordon looked desperate. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out as if to touch my arm. I did not move, but my gaze was so cold, he stopped mid-motion and dropped his hand. I am sorry, he said. The apology was rushed. It was clumsy. It was a frantic attempt to throw a blanket over a fire. It was not an apology born of remorse. It was an apology born of fear. He was terrified. He was terrified because he realized that the fate of his firm, the fate of his legacy, and the fate of his son were currently held in the hands of the person he had spent a decade belittling. I was hard on you, he stammered. Back then, I wanted to toughen you up. It was a different time. I didn't mean to. Stop, I said. I did not raise my voice. But the command was absolute. Do not rewrite history. Gordon, you were not trying to toughen me up. You were trying to tear me down because I did not fit your picture of what power looks like. I watched him struggle for a response. He had none. The truth was a wall he could not climb over. I looked at Dale and Nolan. They were staring at Gordon with a new expression. It was not respect. It was doubt. They were seeing their leader humiliated, not by a competitor, but by his own past. They were realizing that his judgment was not just flawed, it was poisoned. I turned back to Gordon. "Your apology is noted." I said. It was a dismissal. I did not accept it. I did not reject it. I simply filed it away as irrelevant data. But my decision regarding the partnership remains unchanged. The proposal is rejected. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open with a smooth, mechanical hiss. The sound was like a gavel striking a sounding block. Gordon looked at the open elevator car. It was his escape route, but it also looked like a coffin. He knew that once those doors closed, he was going back to Denver with nothing. He was going back to a dying firm, a reckless son, and the knowledge that he had burned the only bridge that could have saved him. He stepped into the elevator. Dale and Nolan followed, moving quickly, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the lobby. Gordon turned around to face me as the doors began to slide shut. He looked old, for the first time. I saw the lines etched deep around his eyes. I saw the tremor in his hands. He looked defeated. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to beg one last time, perhaps to say goodbye. But I spoke first. I decided to throw him a lifeline, not because I felt sorry for him, but because I was not done with him. I did not want him to go back to Denver and simply fail. I wanted him to go back to Denver and wait. I wanted him to sit by the phone. I wanted him to know that I held the string, and I could pull it whenever I chose. "Mr. Mercer," I said, my voice cutting through the narrowing gap between the doors. He looked up, hope flaring in his eyes like a dying match. "I will review the file again," I said. The doors were halfway closed, but only if I see a structure that makes sense for both sides. I added, and only if the terms are dictated by reality, not nostalgia. Gordon nodded. He nodded frantically. We will send over whatever you need," he said. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. I stood there for a moment, staring at the brushed steel. I could hear the faint whir of the cables as the car descended. He was going down, literally and metaphorically. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. My hands were steady, but I felt a strange vibration in my chest. It was not joy. It was the hum of a machine that had finally been switched on to full power. I had stripped him of his armor. I had forced him to say my name. I had forced him to acknowledge my mother. And I had sent him away with nothing but a vague promise and a heavy load of fear. He would not sleep tonight. He would sit on that plane, staring out the window at the darkness, replaying every insult, every dismissal, every moment he had treated me like furniture. He would realize that every stone he had thrown at me had been collected, and I had just used them to build a fortress he could not enter. I turned around. Lila was standing at her desk. She was not typing. She was not on the phone. She was looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. She had heard enough. She had seen the body language. She knew something monumental had just happened. "Ms. Black?" she asked softly. "Are you okay?" I looked at her. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I checked my watch. It was 3:00. I had a conference call with a client in London in 15 minutes. "I am fine. Lila," I said. I walked back toward my office, my heels clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. "Actually," I said, pausing at her desk, "I am better than fine." I looked at the closed door of the small glass conference room. It was empty now. The water glasses were still on the table. "Send a memo to the analysis team," I instructed. "Tell them to keep the Mercer file open, but change the project code." "Change it to what?" Lila asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Change it to Project Echo," I said, because finally, after 20 years, my voice was coming back to him, and it was going to be the only thing he could hear. I walked into my office and closed the door. I sat down in my chair, the leather creaking softly. I swiveled to face the window. The view of Arlington was unchanged, but the world felt different. The balance had shifted. I picked up my pen. I opened the notebook. I looked at the 2 lines I had written. "Let him fill the silence." Now, let him sweat. I added a third line, pressing the ink into the paper until it was black and permanent. When he calls back, I name the price. The phone on my desk remained silent, but I knew it would ring, not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Gordon Mercer was a man drowning, and I had just shown him that I was the only one who knew how to swim. He would call, and when he did, I would not be answering as his friend. I would not be answering as his enemy. I would be answering as the owner. 3 days after Gordon Mercer walked out of my lobby, looking like a man who had seen a ghost, I instructed my IT director to open a secure, encrypted data room. I did not call Gordon. I did not email him. I simply sent a system-generated notification to his inbox with a link and a password. The message was automated, cold, and devoid of humanity. It read, "Access granted. Upload required documents within 48 hours. If Gordon wanted a second chance, he was not going to get it over a scotch in a dim library. He was going to get it by stripping his firm naked digitally and letting me examine every scar, every fracture, and every tumor. I wanted total transparency. I wanted the internal emails, the client complaints, the draft settlements, and the HR grievances. I wanted to see the rot he had been hiding under the veneer of tradition. While my analysis team in Arlington began the forensic dissection of the uploaded documents, I booked a flight to Denver. I traveled under the radar. I did not fly first class. I did not stay at the Ritz-Carlton. I booked a room at a modern, nondescript business hotel downtown, 3 blocks away from the Mercer, Whitaker and Lowe offices. I was not there to negotiate with the partners. I was there to inspect the inventory. And in a law firm, the inventory is the people. I had sent a private message via LinkedIn to Maris Cole. It was risky. If she showed it to Gordon or Trent, my cover would be blown, and they would accuse me of poaching talent during active negotiations. But my instincts told me Maris was not loyal to the name on the door. She was loyal to the work. We met at 6 o'clock in the evening at a coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and rain. It was snowing lightly outside, the kind of wet, heavy snow that blankets a city in silence. Maris arrived 5 minutes early. She was younger than I expected, perhaps 29, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She wore a suit that was practical rather than expensive, and she carried a backpack instead of a briefcase. She sat down across from me, looking nervous but defiant. She did not order anything. "Ms. Black," she said, keeping her voice low. "I am not sure what this meeting is about. If you are here to offer me a job, I should tell you that I have a non-compete clause that is terrifyingly broad." I smiled, wrapping my hands around a warm cup of tea. "I am not here to offer you a job. Maris, not yet. I am here to ask you about the job you already have." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. "I am looking at acquiring your firm," I said, dropping the bomb quietly. Maris did not gasp. She did not look shocked. She simply let out a long, ragged sigh, as if she had been holding her breath for 6 months. "Thank God," she whispered. "Tell me why," I asked. "And do not give me the corporate answer. Tell me the truth." Maris looked at her hands. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "We are drowning," she said. "And it is not because we do not have the work. We have the work. I have billed 200 hours this month alone. My team is working weekends. We are winning cases. But every time we bring in a win, the money seems to vanish." She looked up at me, and her eyes were fierce, but that is not the worst part. "Ms. Black, the worst part is the leadership. We are not afraid of work. We are used to work. We are afraid of being led by ego." The word hung in the air between us. Ego. It struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was the exact word I had used to describe Gordon's fatal flaw. "What do you mean?" I asked. Maris leaned in. "Gordon, Mr. Mercer, he refuses to settle cases that we should settle because he thinks it looks weak. He drags us into trials we cannot win just to prove a point. And Trent," she stopped. checking around the shop again. Go on, I urged gently. Trent is dangerous, she said. He promises clients things we cannot deliver. He overrules our legal research because he thinks he has a gut feeling. He treats the associate pool like his personal assistants. We are losing good lawyers every week because they cannot stand to work for a man who thinks the rules of ethics are just suggestions. She took a breath. If you buy us, she said, her voice trembling slightly, please tell me you will change the structure. If you just give them money and keep them in charge, you are not saving the firm. You are just funding the funeral. I reached across the table and placed my hand on hers for a brief second. It was a breach of my usual protocol, but I saw myself in her. I saw the frustration of a professional who wanted to be excellent but was being held back by a system designed to protect mediocre men. I hear you, Maris, I said, and I promise you this. If I do this deal, I am not buying a legacy. I am buying a future, and you are part of that future. I left her there and walked back to my hotel through the snow. The city felt cold, but my mind was burning. Maris had confirmed my suspicion. The asset was not Gordon. The asset was the team he was neglecting. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and connected to the secure server. My team in Arlington had been busy. A notification popped up. Priority flag. Financial covenants. I opened the file. It was a scanned copy of their credit agreement with the Rocky Mountain Regional Bank. I scrolled to the covenant section. The bank required the firm to maintain a debt-to-income ratio of no more than 3-to-1. I pulled up their current financials. They were at 2.9. They were razor close. But then I saw the kicker. There was a clause that triggered an automatic freeze of their credit line if their cash reserves dipped below $500,000 for more than 10 consecutive days. I checked their daily cash flow report. They were currently sitting at $600,000, but payroll was due on Friday. That was a $300,000 hit. They were going to breach the covenant in 4 days. If they breached, the bank would freeze their accounts, checks would bounce, the lights would go out. The firm would effectively die over the weekend. Gordon did not have months. He had hours. But the real horror was in the next file. My analysts had titled it, The Trent LOI. I opened it. It was a letter of intent, signed 3 days ago by Trent Mercer and a representative from Vulture Capital. It was not a loan. It was a sale of rights, in exchange for an immediate cash injection of $3 million. Trent had agreed to give the litigation fund access to the firm's client database for marketing purposes. He had effectively sold the private contact information of every client the firm had represented in the last 10 years. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a violation of attorney-client privilege on a massive scale. If this got out, the firm would not just go bankrupt. Gordon and Trent would be disbarred. They would face class action lawsuits that would wipe out their personal assets. Trent was so desperate to keep the lights on, so desperate to prove he could save the firm without his father's help, that he had committed professional suicide. I realized then that Gordon probably did not know. He was arrogant. Yes, he was old-fashioned, but he was a stickler for the rules. He would never sell his client list. He was losing his firm not because he was a bad lawyer, but because he was a blind father. He had empowered a son who was rotting the business from the inside out. I sat back in the uncomfortable hotel chair. The strategy had to change. This could not be a partnership. A partnership meant shared liability. If I partnered with them, I would inherit Trent's mess. I would be liable for the privacy breach. I needed to quarantine the infection. I opened a blank document and began to draft a new term sheet. I typed furiously, the keys clacking in the silent room. Structure: 100% acquisition. Condition 1: complete dissolution of the current management committee. Condition 2: creation of a transitional executive board, led by Halcyon and Varga appointees. Condition 3: retention of the Mercer name for 24 months to preserve market stability, followed by a rebranding. Condition 4: the ethical clause. I wrote this section carefully. Any existing agreements with third-party litigation funders that compromise client data privacy must be terminated immediately prior to closing. Failure to disclose or terminate such agreements will result in immediate nullification of the acquisition and a report to the State Bar Association. This was the trap for Trent. He would have to confess to his father, or he would have to kill the deal. I was building a cage, but it was a cage designed to save the innocent occupants of the house. I was saving Maris Cole. I was saving the administrative staff. I was saving the clients who had no idea their data was being hawked on the open market. I worked until 3 a.m. My eyes were burning, but I could not stop. I was deep in the data room, looking for one last piece of leverage. I needed something personal. I needed something that would force Gordon to stop fighting me on the terms. I needed something that would break his denial once and for all. I found it in a folder labeled Bar Association Correspondence, Historical. It was a PDF of a letter, dated 12 years ago. The recipient was the Character and Fitness Committee of the Ohio State Bar Association. I recognized the date. It was the year I applied for admission to the bar in Ohio, before I moved my practice to DIOC. I opened the letter. The letterhead was Mercer, Whitaker, and Lowe. The signature at the bottom was Gordon Mercer. I read the text, and the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. To the committee, regarding the application of Ms. Heidi Black. While I have known the applicant's family for many years, I feel a duty to the profession to express my reservations regarding her temperament for the practice of law. Ms. Black has historically demonstrated a fragility under pressure and a tendency toward emotional decision-making that I believe could be a liability to future clients. While she is academically capable, the law requires a fortitude that I have not observed in her character. Sincerely, Gordon Mercer. I stared at the screen. My hand, resting on the mouse, went cold. He had tried to stop me. He had not just mocked me at dinner parties. He had actively tried to sabotage my career before it even started. He had written to the licensing board, using his influence as a senior attorney to cast doubt on my fitness to practice. He had tried to kill my future in the crib. I remembered the delay in my bar admission that year. I remembered the extra interview I had to sit for, where the committee members asked me strange, probing questions about my stress management and emotional stability. I had passed, of course, because I was iron, but I never knew why they had flagged me. Now I knew. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, distilled rage. It was hot on my skin. He had tried to take everything from me. I saved the document to my desktop. I did not print it. I did not need a hard copy. I just needed him to see it. I was not going to use this letter to destroy him publicly. That would be too easy. It would be petty. I was going to use it to silence him. When I sat across from him again, and he tried to argue about the valuation, or he tried to argue about keeping Trent in power, or he tried to talk to me about family and forgiveness, I was going to slide this letter across the table. I was going to show him that I knew exactly who he was. I was going to show him that the fragile girl he wrote about was now the only person standing between him and total ruin. I closed the laptop. The sun was beginning to rise over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I packed my bag. I had what I needed. I had the financial gun, the covenant breach. I had the ethical bomb, Trent's data sale, and I had the moral dagger, the letter. I checked out of the hotel at 6 a.m. I took a cab to the airport. I watched Denver disappear in the rearview mirror. I was going back to Arlington. I was going to call Gordon, but this time, I wasn't asking for a meeting. I was summoning him for a surrender. I pulled out my phone and drafted a text to Lila. Prepare the main boardroom for Saturday morning. Just one chair on the opposing side. No Trent, no partners, just Gordon. I paused, then added one more instruction. And Lila? Print one document for me. Single page, high resolution. I will email it to you. I attached the letter. The game was over. It was time to sign the treaty, and for the first time in history, the terms would be dictated by the girl who was never supposed to be a real lawyer. I summoned Gordon Mercer to Arlington on a Saturday morning. I did not ask him to bring his team. I did not ask him to bring his lawyers. My instructions were precise and non-negotiable. I told him to come alone. No Trent, no Dale, no Nolan. Just the man who had started it all. The office was empty, the usual hum of the associates, the ringing phones, and the clicking of keyboards were absent. There was only the low, ambient drone of the HVAC system and the grayed, flat light of an overcast Virginia morning filtering through the glass. I had Lila set up the main boardroom, a cavernous space designed to intimidate, but I did not sit at the head of the table. I sat in the middle, with a single empty chair placed directly across from me. When Gordon walked in at 9 o'clock sharp, he looked different. The man who had stormed out of my lobby earlier in the week, radiating indignation and entitlement, was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he had not slept in 3 days. His suit was still expensive, but it seemed to hang a little looser on his frame. His tie was perfectly knotted, but his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted it. He did not stride in like a managing partner. He walked in like a defendant entering a sentencing hearing. He stood by the door for a moment, holding his briefcase with both hands. "Come in." "Gordon," I said. I did not stand up. He walked over and pulled out the chair. He looked around the empty room, perhaps missing the buffer of his entourage. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. His voice was quiet. I did not offer him water this time. There were no pleasantries to be exchanged. I placed a single, thick folder on the polished mahogany table between us. "I have reviewed your financials, your operations, and your personnel data." I began. "I have looked at every skeleton you have hidden in your closets in Denver." Gordon swallowed hard. "I know the numbers are challenging," he said, "but we have a plan to turn it around. If we can just secure a partnership, we can stabilize the cash flow." I cut him off. "There will be no partnership," I said. Gordon flinched. He looked at me, his eyes widening in panic. "Heidi, please, if you say no, we are done. You know that. The bank is going to call the loan on Tuesday. We need a partner." "You are not listening," I said calmly. "I said there will be no partnership. A partnership implies a merging of equals. It implies that I am taking on a portion of your risk while you retain control. I am not willing to do that." I tapped the folder. "I am not offering to partner with you, Gordon. I am offering to acquire you." The word hung in the silence like a guillotine blade. "Acquire." Gordon stared at me. His mouth opened slightly. "You? You want to buy us?" I nodded. 100%. Halcyon and Varga will purchase all assets, liabilities, and intellectual property of Mercer. Whitaker and Lowe. You will cease to exist as an independent entity." Gordon shook his head. A reflex of denial. "No, no. We cannot do that. That is my name on the door. That is 35 years of my life. We are an institution in the West. We cannot just be swallowed up." "You do not have a choice," I said. I spoke the words without malice, just as a statement of fact. I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. It was the analysis of his bank covenants. "You are in breach of your liquidity requirements as of yesterday," I explained. "I know about the cash reserves. I know about the settlement payout you tried to hide. If I do not wire $3 million into your operating account by Monday morning, your lines of credit freeze. You will not be able to make payroll. Your associates will walk. Your clients will receive notices that their funds are frozen. It will be an implosion." Gordon. He looked down at the document. He knew it was true. He just had not expected me to know it. "This is the only way to not kill your clients," I said. "A partnership is too messy. It triggers the change of control clauses without giving me the authority to fix the rot. An acquisition allows me to inject capital immediately. It allows me to tell your bank that the debt is backed by Halcyon and Varga. It saves the business." Gordon looked up at me, his eyes wet. "But what about the partners? What about me?" I slid the term sheet across the table. "Here are the conditions," I said. I watched him read them. I watched his eyes scan the lines I had written in the hotel room in Denver. "Condition 1, I recited. Halcyon and Varga takes 100% ownership. We will retain the name Mercer. Whitaker and Lowe for 24 months to ensure market stability and client retention. After 2 years. The name changes. Gordon winced. 2 years? Condition 2. I continued. The current management committee is dissolved effective immediately. You, Dale, and Nolan will transition to of council roles. You will have no voting rights. You will have no operational authority. You will serve as advisors to ease the client transition. He looked up, hurt flashing across his face. You are demoting me? In my own firm? I am paying you a salary to shake hands and tell your old friends that everything is fine. I corrected. That is not a demotion. That is a mercy. I waited for him to process the loss of power. It was the hardest thing for a man like him to swallow. But I had to push further. I had to show him why he was losing his crown. Condition 3, I said. Personnel retention. I am keeping 90% of your associates and support staff. I am restructuring their compensation to match our levels in Virginia. Gordon looked confused. You are keeping the staff? But usually in an acquisition. Usually you cut the overhead. I am not buying your overhead. Gordon, I said sharply, I am buying your talent. The talent you have been ignoring. He looked down at the paper again. Then he frowned. Where is Trent? He asked. I do not see Trent's name in the partner transition list. I sat back in my chair. This was the first blow. Trent is not part of the deal, I said. Gordon's face reddened. Now wait a minute. Trent is a partner. He is the future. If I step down, he needs to have a leadership role. You cannot just cut him out. That is my son. Your son, I said, my voice hardening, is the reason you are sitting in that chair begging for a check. I reached into the folder and pulled out the second document. The letter of intent with Vulture Capital. I slid it across the table. It landed on top of the term sheet. Do you know what this is? I asked. Gordon picked it up. He squinted at the text. He saw the logo of the litigation fund. He saw the signature at the bottom. I watched the blood drain from his face. I watched his hands start to shake uncontrollably. He signed this? Gordon whispered. 3 days ago. I confirmed. He agreed to sell your client marketing data to a third-party predatory lender in exchange for a cash infusion. He was going to breach attorney-client privilege on a massive scale. If this deal had gone through, you would have been disbarred. Gordon stared at the paper. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. I told him no, he stammered. I told him it was too risky. I told him we could not do it. He did it anyway. I said, because he is desperate, because he is incompetent, and because you taught him that being a mercer meant you could talk your way out of consequences. I leaned forward. I cannot have that liability in my firm. Gordon, Trent is out. He can resign quietly, or I can fire him for cause once the deal closes. But he will never practice law under my banner. Gordon slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked at the signature of his son. The son he had championed over me. The son he had called a real lawyer. He realized that his blind loyalty had almost cost him his entire reputation. I did not know, he whispered. I swear to you. Heidi, I did not know. I believe you. I said, and that is the problem. You were the captain, and you were sleeping while the ship was being steered into the rocks. The room was silent for a long time. Gordon put the paper down. He looked small. He looked defeated. Is that it? He asked hoarsely. I lose my firm. I lose my legacy. My son loses his career. And you take everything. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had loomed so large in my childhood. Not everything. I said, I am leaving you your dignity. I am letting you retire with a press release that says, this was a strategic merger. I am saving your clients. I am saving your employees. I paused. But there is one more thing. I said. I reached into the folder for the last time. My hand brushed against the paper. It felt hot to the touch. This was not business. This was personal. This was for the 9-year-old girl. This was for the law student. This was for the woman who had to change her name to escape his shadow. I pulled out the character reference letter he had written to the Ohio Bar Association 12 years ago. I placed it gently on the table. Face up. I found this in your archived files. I said. Gordon looked at it. He recognized the letterhead. He read the first few lines. Ms. Black has historically demonstrated a fragility under pressure. He stopped reading. He looked up at me, and his face went completely white. It was the look of a man who realizes he has been caught in a lie he forgot he told. Heidi, he gasped. You tried to stop me. I said. My voice was very quiet, very steady. You did not just tell me I wasn't good enough. You tried to ensure I would never get the chance to prove you wrong. You wrote to the licensing board and told them I was unstable. You tried to close the door on my future because you did not like my personality. Gordon looked down at his own signature. He could not look at me. I thought I was protecting the profession. He mumbled. It sounds weak even to my own ears. He added, You called me fragile. I said, You said I would crack under pressure. I gestured to the room, to the term sheet, to the evidence of his ruin. Look at us now. Gordon, who is cracking? He put his head in his hands. He let out a long, shuddering breath. I was wrong, he said. His voice was muffled. I was so wrong. He looked up. His eyes were red. Is this what this is about? He asked. Is this revenge? Did you orchestrate this entire acquisition just to punish me? To humiliate me? I looked at him. I thought about the easy answer. I thought about telling him yes, that I had spent 20 years sharpening a knife for this exact moment, but that was not the truth. No. I said. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the gray sky. Revenge would be letting you fail, I said, turning back to face him. Revenge would be letting the bank seize your accounts on Tuesday. Revenge would be watching from a distance while the Bar Association disbarred you and your son. That would be easy. That would be poetic. I walked back to the table and rested my hands on the leather surface. I am not drowning you. Gordon, I am handing you a life raft. I am saving the people you hired. I am saving the clients you promised to protect. I am doing the job you are no longer capable of doing. I pointed to the term sheet, but I am holding the rope. And if you want to be saved, you have to let me pull you in. You have to admit that you need me. You have to admit that the girl you dismissed is the only one strong enough to carry your weight. Gordon looked at me. For a long moment, he said nothing. He looked at the term sheet. He looked at the letter. He looked at the wreckage of his ego spread out on the table. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a pen. He did not argue about the price. He did not argue about the title. He did not even argue about Trent. He signed the term sheet. He capped the pen and pushed the paper back to me. Thank you, he said. It was the first time he had ever thanked me. He stood up. He looked older than he had when he walked in. He looked lighter, but also hollowed out. Heidi, he said. I looked up from the signature. I know I have no right to ask for anything else, he said. The business deal is done. You won. But, he hesitated. Is there any chance we can fix the other part? Not the partners, the family. Can I have a chance to just be a father figure? Or at least an uncle? I missed so much. I see that now. I looked at him. I saw the regret. It was genuine. But I also knew that regret is cheap when you have lost your leverage. I did not smile. I did not soften. We can try. I said. Gordon's face brightened just a fraction, but, I added, raising a finger, you need to understand the new dynamic. You do not get to be the mentor anymore. You do not get to give me advice. You do not get to tell me who I am. I picked up the character reference letter and tore it in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I tore it in half again. You have to earn my respect. Gordon, I said, dropping the pieces into the wastebasket, just like I had to earn yours, and you are starting from zero. Gordon nodded. He understood. I understand, he said. He turned to leave. He walked to the door, then paused. You are a real lawyer, Heidi, he said softly. The best I have ever seen. He walked out. I stood alone in the boardroom. I looked at the signed term sheet. I looked at the empty chair. It was done. I owned him. I owned the firm. I owned the past. I sat down in my chair and closed my eyes. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but beneath it, a quiet, steady pride. I had not destroyed him. I had simply forced him to live in the world as it actually was. Not the world he wanted it to be. I reached for the intercom. "Lila?" I said. "Yes, Ms. Black?" "Get the legal team to draft the final closing documents," I said. "And Lila?" "Yes?" "Send a bottle of scotch to Gordon Mercer's hotel room. The good stuff." "Why?" she asked. "Is it a celebration?" "No." I said. "It is a consolation prize." I cut the connection. I picked up the term sheet and walked out of the room. The deal was signed. Now, the real work, the work of rebuilding what he had broken, could finally begin. Monday morning arrived with the deceptive calm of a receding tide. The term sheet, finalized and vetted by 3 rounds of legal counsel, sat on the center of my desk in Arlington. It was a pristine stack of paper, representing the end of a war I had been fighting since I was 9 years old. I had the pen in my hand. I was 5 minutes away from the video conference call where Gordon Mercer would sign the counterpart in Denver, effectively surrendering his firm to mine. And then, my phone lit up. It was not a call. It was a notification from the Legal Ledger, a widely read industry gossip blog that prided itself on exposing the dirty laundry of the top 200 firms. The headline hit me like a physical slap. Halcyon and Varga to acquire failing Denver firm. Strategic masterstroke or family bailout. My blood ran cold. I tapped the link. The article was anonymous, citing insiders close to the negotiation. It detailed the acquisition not as a predatory takeover of a distressed asset, but as a nepotistic rescue mission. It revealed my biological relationship to Gordon Mercer, a fact I had kept buried for my entire career. It claimed that I was using Halcyon and Varga's capital to cover up gross financial mismanagement by my uncle, implying a conflict of interest that bordered on fiduciary negligence. This was not just a leak. This was a targeted assassination of my reputation. Within 30 seconds, my intercom buzzed. It was Lila. Her voice was tight. "Ms. Black, the internal line is lighting up. I have 3 members of the executive committee on hold, and we just got a call from the general counsel of Bitterroot Resources. They want to know if the rumors about the firm's solvency are true." I stared at the phone. The timing was too perfect. This was not a random slip of the tongue by a junior associate. This was scorched earth. "Tell the committee I will address them in 20 minutes, I said, my voice sounding calm even though my pulse was hammering in my throat. "And tell Bitterroot that we will be issuing a formal statement shortly. Do not put anyone through." I stood up and paced the length of my office. Who benefits? That is the first question in any investigation. Who benefits from blowing up this deal at the 11th hour? Not Gordon. He needed the money by tomorrow or his firm died. Not my partners. They wanted the client list. Not the competitors. They would rather wait for the firm to collapse and pick over the carcass for free. Then it hit me. There was only one person who had nothing to lose because he had already lost everything. Trent. I sat back down and opened the secure data channel we had established with the Denver office. I messaged my IT director, a man named Silas who could find a digital footprint in a blizzard. "Silas, I need a forensic scan of the outgoing traffic from the Mercer server in Denver. Specifically, look for any encrypted emails sent to the Legal Ledger domain in the last 12 hours. Focus on Trent Mercer's terminal." While I waited, I dialed into the video conference. The screen flickered to life. The conference room in Denver was grim. Gordon sat at the head of the table, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Dale Whitaker and Nolan Lowe were pacing behind him, their faces flushed with anger. "Ms. Black," Dale shouted before the video feed had even fully stabilized. "This is an outrage. Did you leak this? Is this some kind of tactic to lower the purchase price?" I looked at them. They were panicking. They saw their golden parachute burning up in the atmosphere. "Sit down." "Dale," I said. My voice was ice. "I did not leak it." I continued. "Why would I sabotage my own deal?" Why would I invite scrutiny from my own board? Think. Gordon looked at the camera. He looked shattered. The article had exposed his failure to the world. The illusion of the strategic partnership was gone. Everyone knew he was being bailed out by his niece. Then who? Gordon asked, his voice shaking. Who would do this to us? I waited. My computer chimed. It was the report from Silas. I opened it. It was exactly what I expected. I have the answer. I said. I shared my screen with the room in Denver. It displayed a log of email traffic. At 3:14 in the morning, Denver time, an email was sent from a private Gmail account accessed via the firm's secure VPN. I explained, highlighting the line, the IP address matches the desktop computer in the office of Trent Mercer. The recipient is the tip line for the legal ledger. The room in Denver went deadly silent. Gordon stared at the screen. Dale stopped pacing. He attached the draft term sheet, I added, and he provided the commentary about the family connection. He wrote the narrative, Gordon. He framed it as a conflict of interest to trigger an investigation by my board. Why? Nolan whispered. Why would he kill the deal that saves his inheritance? Because he is not part of the deal. I said, because I cut him out, and because he still thinks that if this deal fails, he can force you to sign the agreement with Vulture Capital. He is trying to burn down my bridge so you have to walk across his... Gordon put his head in his hands. It was a gesture of total defeat. He had defended Trent for years. He had covered for his mistakes. He had promoted him over better lawyers. And now, his son had tried to destroy him. We have to call it off, Dale said, his voice rising in hysteria. The board will never approve this now. The public perception is toxic. No. I said, I leaned into the camera. We are not calling it off. That is exactly what he wants. I looked directly at Gordon. He was looking down at the table, his shoulders shaking. Gordon, look at me. He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. You have a choice, I said. And this time, you cannot equivocate. You cannot be the father. You have to be the managing partner. I sent a new document to the printer in the Denver conference room. They could hear it whirring to life in the corner. That is a formal suspension order. I said, it suspends Trent Mercer from the practice of law at the firm, effective immediately. It revokes his access to the building and the servers, and it authorizes a formal complaint to the Bar Association regarding the breach of confidentiality. Gordon looked at the printer. He looked at the paper sliding into the tray. You want me to fire him? He whispered. I want you to save your firm, I replied. If you sign that paper, I can go to my board and tell them that the leak was a malicious act by a disgruntled former employee who has been removed. I can frame this as a cleansing of the toxicity. I can save the deal. And if I don't? Gordon asked. Then the deal is dead. I said, I hang up. The bank freezes your accounts tomorrow. And Trent's legacy will be that he turned the lights off on 35 years of your hard work. The silence stretched out. It was heavy and suffocating. Dale and Nolan were watching Gordon. Their breath held. They knew their financial futures hung on his pen. Gordon stood up. He walked slowly to the printer. He picked up the page. He stared at it for a long time. I wondered if he was thinking about the little boy he used to play catch with, or the arrogant man who had sold his client list to a loan shark. He walked back to the table. He took a pen from his pocket. For a second, his hand hovered over the paper. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, he slashed his signature across the bottom line. He shoved the paper toward the camera lens. It is done, he rasped. I nodded. Good. Now, get security to escort him out. I want his keycard deactivated within 5 minutes. Gordon sank back into his chair. He looked like a ghost. Dale Whitaker wiped sweat from his forehead. This is a nightmare, he muttered. Families. Families always destroy business. We should have never let family into the firm. I heard him, and I could not let that stand. Wrong. Dale, I said sharply. He looked up, startled. Family did not destroy your business. I said, ego destroyed your business. Secrets destroyed your business. You let a mediocre lawyer run rampant because he had the right last name. You ignored the warnings because you didn't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. Do not blame the family, blame the silence. I checked the time. I had 10 minutes before my board meeting. Now, I said, shifting gears. We have one more issue to resolve. With Gordon moving to an advisory role and Trent removed, there is a leadership vacuum in Denver. The article claims the firm is rudderless. We need to announce an interim head of the office immediately. Nolan straightened his tie. Well, obviously. Dale or I can step in. No, I interrupted. The three men looked at me. You are both part of the old regime. I said, you were both in the room while the ship sank. If I put you in charge, the market will see it as more of the same. I need a signal that things have changed. I need someone who represents the future, not the past. Then who? Gordon asked. He sounded tired. Who else is there? We don't have anyone senior enough. You do? I said, you just haven't been looking at her. I took a breath. This was the gamble. This was the moment I turned the knife. Not to kill, but to perform surgery. The interim head of the Denver office will be Maris Cole. The reaction was immediate. Maris? Gordon blurted out. The associate? But she is not even a partner. She is abrasive. She doesn't have the polish. She billed 2,400 hours last year. I countered. She knows every case file better than you do. She is the only one in that building who had the courage to tell me the truth when I came to investigate. She has the respect of the associates you are trying to retain. But the clients... Nolan started. The clients want competence. I snapped. They are tired of being charmed. They want their cases won. Maris wins. I looked at Gordon. You told me she wasn't a cultural fit. I said, you were right. She wasn't a fit for a culture of failure. She is a perfect fit for mine. Gordon looked down. He was replaying the last 5 years in his head, realizing how many times he had dismissed her, how many times he had mistaken her seriousness for insolence. He was realizing that the real lawyer he had been looking for had been sitting down the hall the entire time. She is young, Gordon said weakly. She is the same age I was when I made managing partner. I replied. Gordon closed his eyes. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Okay. If that is what you want, it is not what I want. I said. It is what the firm needs. I looked at the signed term sheet on my desk. The crisis had been averted. The leak had been plugged. The toxicity had been excised. I signed the document. The scratch of my pen was loud in the quiet office. I held it up to the camera. We are closed, I said. There were no cheers. There was no champagne popping. In Denver, the three men looked like they had survived a shipwreck, alive, but soaked and shivering. Gordon looked at the screen. He looked at me. Heidi, he said. Yes? Thank you for shielding us, he said. Even after the article. You could have walked away. You could have let us burn to prove a point. I looked at the uncle who had once told me I would never make it. I didn't do it for you. Gordon, I said gently, I did it because the name Black is on the acquisition papers, and I don't lose. I ended the call. The screen went black. I sat there for a moment in the silence. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a dull ache in my chest. I had won. I had acquired the firm. I had vindicated my career. I had saved the innocent. But I had also just watched a father cut off his son to save his own skin. I had watched a family break apart in real time. It did not feel like a triumph. It felt like a necessary tragedy. I picked up the phone to call Maris Cole. I had to tell her that she was no longer an invisible associate. I had to tell her that she was now the boss of the men who had ignored her. But before I dialed, I looked out the window at the gray Virginia sky. The term sheet was signed. The structure was correct. The logic was sound. But the air in the room felt heavy. That is the thing about the truth. It cleans the wound, but it stings like hell. I dialed the number. Maris, I said when she answered, it is Heidi Black. Do not make plans for dinner. We have work to do. 60 days is a standard closing period for a complex commercial acquisition, but for the transition of Mercer, Whitaker and Lowe into a subsidiary of Halcyon and Varga, It felt like a lifetime. I stood in the lobby of the Denver office on a Tuesday morning in December. The air outside was biting, carrying the sharp, clean scent of snow from the Rockies. But inside, the atmosphere was warm and smelling of fresh paint. The old, heavy mahogany reception desk had been removed, replaced by a sleek, low-profile station made of glass and sustainable timber. But the most significant change was not the furniture, it was the wall behind it. The brass letters that had spelled out the names of the 3 founding partners for 35 years were gone. In their place, mounted on a panel of brushed steel, was the new identity: Mercer Legal, a Halcyon and Varga company. I had kept the Mercer name, as promised, but I had subordinated it. It was no longer a kingdom, it was a department. I was reviewing the final integration checklist on my tablet when the automatic doors slid open. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The heavy, uneven footsteps were familiar, though they lacked the confident cadence they once held. It was Trent. He looked like a man who had spent the last 2 months trying to find a door that would open for him, only to find them all bolted. His coat was expensive but unpressed. His hair, usually styled to perfection, looked windblown and neglected. He walked up to me, stopping just short of the security barrier that his keycard no longer opened. "Heidi," he said. I looked up. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply acknowledged his presence with a nod. "Trent, I heard you were in town for the town hall," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Look, I wanted to come by. I wanted to clear the air." I waited. Silence is a wonderful filter. It catches everything a person is trying not to say. "I know I messed up," he continued, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "I took a risk with Vulture Capital. It was stupid. I see that now. But I did it for the firm. I did it to save Dad's legacy." He paused, waiting for me to validate his delusion. When I didn't, he pressed on. "I want to come back. Heidi, this is my home. I know the clients. I know the system. I am willing to let bygones be bygones. I am ready to work." I looked at him. He truly believed that forgiveness was a transaction. He believed that because we shared a history, he was entitled to a future. I closed my tablet. "We are hiring," I said calmly. Trent's face lit up. He straightened his shoulders, the old arrogance flickering back to life. "I knew you would understand. Blood is thicker than water, right? So, where do I fit in? Are you thinking of counsel? Or maybe heading up the litigation vertical?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "We have an opening in the Document Review Center." Trent froze. His smile faltered. "Document review? It is an entry-level position," I explained, my voice steady and devoid of mockery. "You would be reading discovery files for relevance, flagging emails, checking timestamps. It pays $65,000 a year. You would report to the senior associate in charge of data processing." Trent stared at me. His face turned a mottled shade of red. "You are joking," he spat. "I was a partner. I was the heir apparent. You want me to sit in a basement and read emails like a first-year grad? I want you to learn the law." "Trent," I said, "I want you to understand that the work matters more than the title. If you want to be a lawyer in my firm, you start where everyone else starts. You earn it." "I am not doing that," he sneered. "That is beneath me." "Then you are not a lawyer," I said. "You are just a man in a suit." I signaled to the security guard, a new hire who did not know Trent and therefore did not fear him. "Please escort Mr. Mercer out," I said. Trent looked at me with pure venom. "You think you have won, don't you? You think just because you bought the building, you own us." I did not answer. I didn't need to. He turned and stormed out, the doors sliding shut behind him. He walked out into the cold, choosing his ego over his career. He chose to be a star in exile rather than a worker in the arena. It was the end of his story, and I felt absolutely nothing but a sense of completed paperwork. 2 hours later, the town hall began. We gathered in the main atrium. Every employee of the Denver office was there: associates, paralegals, administrative assistants, and the remaining partners. There was a nervous energy in the room. They had spent the last 2 months wondering if they would have jobs by Christmas. I stood on a small riser at the front of the room. I did not use a podium. I wanted them to see me. "Good morning," I said into the microphone. "My name is Heidi Black, and I am not here to dismantle this firm. I am here to give it a foundation." I saw shoulders relax. I saw people exchange glances. For too long. I continued. "This firm has operated on the belief that a famous name is enough to sustain a business. It is not. A business is sustained by its people, by the late nights you spend on discovery, by the difficult calls you make to clients, by the integrity you show when no one is watching." I gestured to the screen behind me, where the new organizational chart was displayed. "We are implementing a new compensation structure effective immediately," I announced. "We are matching the salary bands of our Virginia office. For most of you, that means a raise of 15 to 20%. A murmur went through the room. A few people gasped, and I added, raising my hand for silence, "We are implementing a retention bonus for all staff who have been with the firm for more than 3 years. You stayed when the ship was sinking. You deserve to share in the repair." The applause started slowly, then swelled. It was not polite applause. It was the sound of relief. It was the sound of people realizing that their rent was covered, but I am not the one who needs to tell you where we are going. I said. I turned to the side of the room. Gordon Mercer was sitting there. He was wearing a gray suit, not his usual power navy. He looked thinner, but his eyes were clear. I invited Gordon up to the stage. The room went quiet. They had not seen him speak since the acquisition was announced. They expected him to be bitter. They expected him to be defensive. Gordon took the microphone. His hand trembled slightly, a humanizing flaw he would have hidden 2 months ago. He looked out at the crowd. He looked at the faces he had employed but never truly seen. "I have spent 35 years standing in front of you," Gordon began, his voice raspy. "And I spent most of that time telling you what a great firm we were. I told you we were the best. I told you we were a family." He paused. He looked down at his shoes, then back up. "I lied," he said. The silence was absolute. "We were not a family," he said. "A family does not ignore its most vulnerable members. A family does not prioritize the ego of the father over the well-being of the children. I was not leading you. I was using you to prop up an image of myself that I fell in love with a long time ago." He turned to look at me. "I owe an apology to Heidi Black," he said, "not because she bought the firm, but because she saw the truth about me when I refused to look in the mirror. She told me that I didn't know what a real lawyer was." Gordon took a deep breath. "I thought a real lawyer was someone who dominated the room. I thought it was someone who could shout the loudest. I was wrong. A real lawyer is someone who does the work, someone who protects the client even when it is not glamorous." He turned back to the crowd. "And that is why," he said, his voice gaining strength, "my last act as managing partner, and my first act as your advisor, is to correct my biggest mistake." He gestured to the front row, where Maris Cole was sitting. She looked terrified, clutching her notebook like a shield. "I am stepping down from all operational duties," Gordon announced, "and I am proud to announce that the interim director of the Denver office will be Maris Cole." The room exploded. It was not just applause, it was a roar. The associates stood up. The paralegals stood up. Maris sat there, stunned, her hand over her mouth, as her colleagues, the people who knew exactly how hard she worked, cheered for her vindication. Gordon waited for the noise to die down. "I missed her," he said into the microphone, his voice cracking. "She was right here, doing the work, saving our reputation, and I didn't see her because she didn't look like what I thought a leader should look like." He looked at me again, and this time, there was no mask. "I missed her talent," he said softly, "just like I missed my chance to be a father to the daughter I should have had. I was too busy looking for a reflection of myself." He handed the microphone back to me and walked off the stage. He walked over to Maris, shook her hand, and then sat down in the audience. It was the most powerful closing argument he had ever made that evening. The office was quiet. The celebration drinks had ended. The cleaners were buffing the floors. I was in the temporary office I was using, packing my bag for the flight back to Virginia. There was a knock on the doorframe. Gordon stood there. He was holding a small, battered cardboard box. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I nodded. "Come in?" He placed the box on the desk. It smelled of dust and old paper. "I am clearing out my office," he said. "I found these in the bottom drawer of my desk." He opened the lid. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Some were yellowed with age. Some were crisp and white. All of them were addressed to me. Heidi Black. I picked one up. The postmark date was 10 years ago. "What are these?" I asked. "Letters," he said. "I wrote them, over the years." I opened the one in my hand. It was dated the week I made partner at Halcyon and Varga. "Dear Heidi," it read, "I saw the announcement in the journal today. I wanted to call, but I didn't know what to say. You have done something remarkable. I told people you were too soft. I think I was afraid that you were actually just stronger than I was ready to deal with. I am proud of you. Gordon." I picked up another one. It was dated the day I changed my name. Heidi, or I suppose, Ms. Black. I heard about the name change. It hurt, but I suppose I earned it. I hope the new name carries you further than mine ever could. There were letters for birthdays, letters for holidays, letters written after he read my articles in law reviews. He had been watching. He had been proud, but his pride had been locked in a cage with his jealousy and his shame. "I never sent them," Gordon said, his voice quiet. "I couldn't. Sending them would mean admitting that I was wrong. It would mean admitting that I was the villain in your story, and I wasn't ready to be the villain." "And now?" I asked, looking up from the faded ink. "Now I know I am not the hero," he said, "and that has to be enough." He looked at me, a pleading look in his eyes. He wanted me to cry. He wanted a hug. He wanted the cinematic moment of reconciliation where the music swells and the past is washed away. But I was not a character in a movie. I was a woman who had spent 20 years building armor to survive his rejection. I placed the letter back in the box. I did not cry. The tears had been cried a long time ago, in a different room, by a different girl. "Thank you for showing me these," I said. Gordon looked crushed. "That is it?" he asked. "Gordon," I said, leaning forward. "It is better that you showed me this late than never showing me at all. It proves that you are capable of reflection." I stood up and picked up my bag. "But you have to understand something," I said firmly. "I do not need your validation to exist. I do not need you to tell me I am good enough. I already know I am." I walked around the desk and stood in front of him. "I do not need a father. Gordon, I am 34 years old. What I need is a partner I can trust. What I need is an advisor who tells me the truth." I extended my hand. "If you can be that, if you can respect me as your boss and your peer, then we can start again. But we start from today, not from the past." Gordon looked at my hand. He looked at the box of letters. He realized that he could not buy forgiveness with old sentiments. He had to earn a relationship with present actions. He took my hand. His grip was solid. It was respectful. "I can do that," he said. "Good," I said. "Then I will see you at the strategy meeting on Monday. Don't be late." I walked out of the office, leaving him with his box of ghosts. I stepped out of the building into the Denver night. The wind was howling, whipping my coat around my legs. I looked up, high above. The new sign was illuminated. Mercer Legal, a Halcyon and Varga company. The letters glowed bright white against the darkness. I took a deep breath of the freezing air. It tasted like victory. Not the victory of crushing an enemy, but the victory of fixing something that was broken. I had taken a structure built on lies and turned it into a structure built on truth. Gordon had told me I would never be a real lawyer. I smiled. He was right. I wasn't the kind of lawyer he knew. I didn't use the law to hide. I used it to reveal. I used it to balance the scales. I was Heidi Black, and the verdict was finally in. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below with your location and share your thoughts on Heidi's journey. Did she do the right thing by giving Gordon a second chance? If you enjoyed this story, Please make sure to subscribe to the Nina Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to us.